It's January, and in Australia that means the debate around Australia Day rears its ugly head again for another year. This year it's taken on a new form, with Peter Dutton calling for a boycott on Australia's biggest retailer and employer, Woolworths. All because Woolies have decided not to sell Australia Day products due to low sales. And it's a bit weird for someone like Peter Dutton to call for a boycott, because that's usually something that's used by the left. And as the leader of the Liberal Party, he should be sticking to classical liberal ideology, which is to leave the free market to decide for itself what it's going to sell and what it's going to buy. But apparently in this case, it's too much, and they've gone down the wrong path. And of course, just like every year when Australia Day rolls around, patriots have been spending hours upon hours in Midjourney creating beautiful AI imagery of a bunch of Aussie blokes sitting around the barbecue saluting the flag. Actually, no, I think that one's new to this year. So this year, the debate around Australia Day and the sometimes separate debate around the Australian flag have combined into one beautiful melting pot of just toxic Australian discourse. So I wanted to take this moment to make a definitive video about why changing the date and changing the flag isn't so unpatriotic. In fact, I think it's the more patriotic thing to do. So let's start with the flag. The most obvious issue is the Union Jack still being on our national flag. The flag of Great Britain, another country, another nation. And that flag itself is made of 3 other flags: Scotland, Ireland, and England. Sorry, Wales. And Ireland doesn't even use that flag anymore, and none of those countries have the Union Jack on their own flags either. They all have their own individual sense of identity, even as part of Great Britain. And as Australia, as a separate country a world away, we still have to have the Union Jack on our flag. Just imagine if the Union Jack was still on the American flag. And even though the US flag is so iconic, it's actually the 27th design, which means it's changed 26 times since 1777. And back home in Australia, we're too scared to change it once. Well, technically twice. We'll get to that. There are only 3 other countries in the world that have the flag of their colonizers still on it: Fiji, Tuvalu, and New Zealand. All of which have made official attempts from the government to at least look into changing their flag. Canada, Kenya, Jamaica, Singapore, India, Sri Lanka all had the Union Jack on their flag, and in the 20th century, they got rid of it. And all of those flags look a fuckload better than they used to, and way more in line with their national identity. Can you imagine the Jamaican bobsled team rolling around with the Union Jack on it? The maple leaf on the Canadian flag is so iconic. All of those countries changed their flag because A, of the problems with colonization, but also they were maturing as a nation, something that in Australia we seem to have a problem doing. What about that little star underneath the Union Jack? Well, that's the Commonwealth, or sometimes known as Federation Star. Originally, it was a 6-pointed star to represent the 6 states of Federation, but we added a 7th point in 1905 to represent a territory. Which territory? The Northern Territory? No. The ACT? No. The Territory of Papa, which today is an entirely different country. So now we can add representation of another country to our flag to add to the other 3 that we had before, again, if we don't count Wales. And to be fair to the 7th point, it was added to represent the Territory of Papa and all new territories in the future. So technically, it does represent the Northern Territory and the ACT, but it's a bit rough. They don't get their own point of the star. You would think that if we were able to go from 6 points to 7 points, we could go to 8 points. Again, in Australia, we're just so scared of change that maybe even adding the 8th point to the Federation Star is too much for us. And then the Southern Cross, despite being literally visible from half the planet, it does feel like it's part of our identity, and also despite the fact that it's also on the New Zealand flag. It's been part of First Nations cosmology for thousands of years, with some seeing it as the footprint of a giant wedge-tailed eagle. And it's been used as a symbol by trade unions to get better working conditions for Australian workers, going back to the days of the Eureka Stockade. Apparently it represents independent spirit, rebellion. You know, the Aussie battler, the underdog, something that is part of our national identity. And that brings us to Australia Day, January 26. What is the significance of January 26? Because it's not the day that Australia was first discovered by First Nations explorers, or Dutch explorers, or the British explorers. And it's not the day that the first fleet first arrived in Botany Bay, because that was January 18. It's supposedly the day that Captain Arthur Phillip and the first fleet sailed into Sydney Harbour, to Sydney Cove, and planted the Union Jack for the first time on Australian soil. Can pronounce this giant continent now a giant fucking prison. And as we know, without seeking the permission of the people that already lived here, people that have been living on this continent peacefully for literally tens of thousands of years prior, breaking Britain's own laws about where they could settle, all based on Captain Cook's lie of Terra Nullius, place belonging to no one. Another interesting and important note on this is that Philip didn't mention anything about January 26 in his official memos back to Britain at the time. The first record of any assembly of the colony wasn't until February 7, so he might not even have the right date for the wrong day to celebrate anyway. But as legend has it, he hoisted that Union Jack and pronounced the prison, and the rest is history. My ancestors go back to the time of the Second Fleet, and if yours go back to the time of early settlement too, our ancestors were sent here to be either abused or be abusers, or both. For First Nations Australians, it represents the day that the lands that they belong to were stolen, that genocide began. So why would any of us want to celebrate that flag on that day? Australia is the only country in the world that celebrates our national day as the day that we were colonized. The US celebrates Independence Day, the day that they became independent from Great Britain. New Zealand has Waitangi Day, the day that the Treaty of Waitangi was signed between representatives of the Crown and Maori chiefs. But Australia doesn't have a day like that. In Australia's fear of change, we voted down the 1999 referendum to become a republic. And still to this day, we don't have a treaty, or in our case, treaties, with any of the First Nations in Australia, making us one of the only settler colonial states in the whole world that doesn't have a treaty with its First Nations people. Yet, despite this shame and all the pain of our history, we do have things to be proud about. From the natural beauty of our vast landscapes, to the spirit of mateship, to the stories of survival, or our incredible multicultural society that represents over 270 different ancestries. And of course, punching well above our weight in international sport. They're all wearing green and gold. Australians do have a sense of identity, and it's under the green and gold. The colours of the golden wattle, the Australian national flower. So why don't we have a flag in those colours? The colours that we all seem to identify as Australian anyway. But how do we design a new flag? Where would we even begin? How about we start from a design system that already exists as an official flag within Australia already? The territory flags. Both the NT and the ACT have their own flags in their own colours in the same design lockup, where the Southern Cross is on the left-hand side, and then there's a unique kind of design pattern in the middle of the right-hand side. So what if we took that and we took the blue from the Australian flag and put that behind the Southern Cross on the left-hand side? And then if we got the green from the Torres Strait Islander flag and put that behind on the right-hand side, then if we got the gold from the sun in the middle of the Aboriginal flag, we need some kind of design for the middle there. A golden wattle would probably make sense. If only someone had already designed that. Oh, that's right, there's the golden wattle flag that already exists. Borrow that and we put this into the new design system. There's a really clever thing about their design is that they've made the golden wattle using kind of a design to represent the Federation Star, which still doesn't have 8 points to it. So I think maybe we could add an 8th point. So then there's the Federation Star and the Southern Cross. We're carrying two of the main things that represent Australia over to the new flag, and then we're actually in the green and gold colors that we already feel like represent us. And then we're getting rid of the Union Jack, and problem solved. Keeping our flag the way it is kind of like an adult wearing their school uniform. Sure, it's a part of your story, it's a part of your history, but it doesn't really fit anymore. It doesn't represent who you are today and who you're becoming. The flag as it stands represents other countries and all of the pain and trauma that has been caused in this country since January 26 or January 18, or since the Dutch came or Captain Cook came. It represents pain. It's not about hating Australia. It's not about feeling shame or guilt for our past. It's about acknowledging what's happened in our past, learning from it, being determined as a nation not to repeat the mistakes of our past, and carve a new path forward as a nation with a new sense of identity that it can stand on its own 2 feet, away from Mother Britain, and properly embracing and acknowledging the amazing, diverse cultures that have been living on this vast continent for 65,000 years, learning from them. We're not this little child. We're a wise and ancient land. And we should have a flag and a day that actually represents that. But until we have a treaty, we're not going to have a day like that. That has to be the thing that we march towards first. Treaties with First Nations Australians. Let's change the date. Let's change the flag. Let's change the future of Australia. And that starts with treaty.